The Truth About Goblins. Chapter 4. Despite his cocky attitude, Annie felt much better having Kit nearby. He was overbearing, to say the least, but he sure knew his way around the market. Even at its peak, when the crowds were rushing to get the best deals, he knew exactly where to turn. She let him hold her hand, much as it displeased her, and obediently followed as he led her through the busy streets. This time, she could get a better view of the market in its entirety. Most shops that she had noticed before had a second or third floor. She wondered what they could be for, but guessed that the extra levels were residences as she glimpsed some families enjoying the view from their second-story balconies. So the Goblin Market wasn't strictly a market, it was also a town. At the same time, she didn't see any homes on the first level. All the apartments in view were on the upper stories. It seemed that commercial space on the ground floor was high in demand. Annie wondered why. She also wondered about the crowds. "Where do all these people come from?" she asked, yelling above the noise. "Above ground," said Kit, also yelling. "And some of them live here too, but most are buyers." It was truly a crowd of all colors. Annie's gaze jumped from person to person, attracted by their bold and curious outfits. It was almost like being at a costume party. She wondered if it was normal for goblins to have such a crazy look about them. Considering Kit's orange hair and her own head of silver, she assumed that goblin genetics were naturally unpredictable, especially as she recalled the red eyes of the guard she had seen back at the Arbiter's Tower. Directing her gaze upwards, she watched the tree branches sway back and forth in the gentle breeze. "Where does the wind come from?" "I dunno," said Kit, pulling her along the crowd. "But how are there trees growing here?" she said. "I mean, how can they grow without sunlight or rain?" "I dunno," he said. Again, she wondered at the great underground expanse. "How do they keep it all from caving in?" "I dunno." "You're the crappiest tour guide ever, you know that?" It was hard to believe that Kit actually lived here without knowing how it all worked. Annie, for one, was dying to know. But that curiosity gradually vanished as the two wandered deeper into the market. There was just too much going on to think about the background stuff. Without warning, Kit yanked her down an alley, escaping the throng of greedy buyers. "There's a shortcut down here," he said, catching his breath. "I think it's some type of tea shop now, where the old herb garden used to be. The crowds are thinner up ahead." It was at that moment, by the light of a nearby lantern, that Annie caught the glint of his golden eyes. She had to look away as she remarked, "You know your way around here, eh?" "Don't you doubt it for a second," he said, gesturing for her to follow. "I grew up here." "I believe it." Chaos born from chaos. When the two came onto the street again, the throng had thinned out. This part of town wasn't as bright or enticing as the street they had just come from, but the ambience had an appeal of its own. There seemed to be a multitude of restaurants and hangout spots rather than open shops and stalls. Gone were the rowdy sellers loitering by their stands, shouting at those passing by and hoping for a sale. On this street, the doors to shops were left open, allowing music and atmosphere to tempt customers into a potential visit. There were bakeries and cafes, restaurants and candy shops. She wanted to go into every one she passed. Everything looked so strange and unfamiliar in a way that was utterly bewitching, much like the sheen of a poison apple. She couldn't help but chuckle as they passed by a tavern, noticing a sign that read, "The Poison Apple." The Goblin Market was undeniably aware of its less than innocent charms. All too soon, their journey came to an end. Kit stopped before a small shop front, glancing at a sign above the door. "Timothy's Teas," he snickered. "Cute." Annie wouldn't have described it as cute. The door was large and seemed quite heavy, and the arched windows on either side made the place look like a shady pub rather than a tea shop. She should have felt anxious, reluctant to enter, but as Kit stepped inside, she didn't hesitate. She was eager to see more. Exclusivity was the atmosphere. The environment was secretive, or at least it felt that way, like a hidden rendezvous for a criminal crowd. Maybe it was the whispering, or the green glow of the lanterns overhead. But Annie couldn't remember ever entering a tea shop like this one. The walls were covered with high shelves of exotic tea leaves and chocolates, along with other enticing goods. The counter at the back of the shop also had a shelf behind it, but this one housed large kegs of hot water, along with something else. It was hard to tell what they were filled with. There were labels on each barrel, but the scarce light made them difficult to read. Dark as it was, the shadows were held at bay by the strange teas in customers' cups. Annie had to look twice to assure herself that, yes, it was the tea that was glowing. As they walked past the tables and suspicious patrons, she couldn't help but stare at all the colorful drinks. Some were blue, some were purple, some were housed in large mugs and others in dainty teacups. The individual aromas of each drink mingled together in a cloud-like steam that hung over the shop. Once again, Annie was seized by the desire to taste something of the unexplored delicacies. But Kit seemed immune to the temptation. He swept past the tables of customers and strode right up to the counter, taking a seat on one of the stools. The barman had his back to the pair, preparing another round of drinks for a woman waiting off to the side. "Hey," said Kit, speaking a little too loudly. "Could you help us out?" The man turned around. He looked young for a shopkeeper, his dark eyes hinting at a boyish timidity that seemed out of place for a man so tall. He straightened his corduroy jacket before dropping his gaze to Kit's. My, hello there. Of course I can help out. What is it you need?" He seemed to know the pair had not come for tea. "We're looking for Sapphira Lazuli," said Kit. "Is she around?" He seemed surprised. Yes, of course." His words came out clumsily, paired with a shy sort of smile that only added to his awkwardness. But Annie still found him to be approachable. "Can we see her?" she asked. Of course," he repeated, removing his cap. "She lives here, of course, just upstairs." He turned his head to a curtain on his left, and then back to the woman waiting for her drinks. Forgive me a moment," he said, apologizing to the two kids. With the swiftness of a trained professional, he prepared a tray of bubbling hot teas, glowing a deep shade of red. He placed it in front of the woman and returned to the waiting pair. Opening the curtain, he motioned for them to enter. Through the curtain they went, stepping into a room even darker than the last. Annie could make out the shape of barrels by the wall and strange plants hanging from the ceiling. But it all passed out of sight as they came to a staircase and rose to the second floor. The man stopped at the top and knocked on the door. "Sapphira? Someone's here to see you." There was an answer from the other side, and the door was opened. So this was the residence on top of Timothy's Teas. The apartment was brighter than the shop down below, with soft lights overhead rather than the green lanterns they had seen upon entering. A desk, a telephone. The furniture was simple, and even the piano in the corner was smothered by piles and piles of books. Organized chaos, but with an endearing sort of charm. There was even a little fireplace burning contently in the corner. By this fire, curled up on the couch, a young woman lifted her gaze. Her eyes widened in surprise as Kit and Annie made their entrance. "Hello," she said, offering a warm smile. She rose to greet them, setting her book aside. Annie was stunned. This was certainly Saphira Lazuli, judging from the photograph. But her plain appearance was such a stark contrast to the outrageous colors of the market. Saphira wore a plain white dress that stopped at her ankles. No sleeves, no frills, no lace. Her face bore testimony to her experience, but her size and stature made her seem much younger. Annie had to remind herself that they were most likely the same age. "Were you looking for me?" said Saphira, after a few seconds of silence. Yeah," said Annie, stepping forward. "I came to see you because I've got some questions." She wasn't sure how to proceed with Kit and the stranger in the room. "Bellator told me to find Saphira Lazuli." After a pause, she added, "My name's Anastasia." "Oh!" Her eyes grew even wider. "Oh my goodness, it's you!" "Do you know these two?" asked the barman, still standing behind them. "Yes." But she stopped and shook her head. "Well, no, I guess you could say that Anastasia and I are—" She smiled. "Old friends. We have a lot to catch up on." "Ah," he said, pulling his cap back on. "I guess I'll leave you to it then." He placed a hand on Kit's shoulder. "Why don't you come downstairs and have a cuppa, young sir? Give the ladies a chance to chat." Kit raised an eyebrow, reluctant to leave, but he shrugged soon after. "Yeah, okay. Just don't be too long, eh?" He cast Annie one last look as he and the stranger exited the room. Saphira smiled again, about to say something else, but she was interrupted by a loud bang from the stairwell. Alarmed, the two girls turned to the door, and then they heard the barman's voice from below. "I'm okay," he called. "We're both okay." Annie could hear Kit laughing downstairs. Timothy," Saphira sighed. "He's a gentleman, if you can look past his clumsiness." She glanced at the door. "And I suppose he can't be blamed for being a little nervous. I think he's still adjusting to market life." "Market life?" Annie couldn't help being curious. "Did he just get here too?" "He's been around for a few months, from what I understand. He was looking for someone to help around the shop, and we happened to bump into each other." She laughed. "He had a hard time convincing me to move in, but I'm glad I did. He's been very kind." Annie nodded, still standing awkwardly in the middle of the room. "Oh, but I guess that's not really important right now," said Saphira. "You're Anastasia Green, right?" She reached for Annie's hands and clasped them in her own. "I've been waiting so long to finally meet you. How are your parents? Your adopted parents, my parents. How are they?" She spouted the questions in a flurry of excitement. "You know, that's my reason for coming to this market. I knew it was close to where you live. I wanted to go above ground to visit, but Bellator told me that I couldn't yet, that it was too early. But now that you're here—" "They're dead," said Annie. Saphira froze, still grasping her hands but saying nothing. The smile fell from her face. She looked as though she was about to say something, but she hesitated and shut her mouth again. Her eyes traveled to the floor, her arms dropped to her sides. Annie regretted her words immediately, realizing she had crossed the line. But it was too late for her to take it back. The damage was done. "I see," said Saphira, her voice low and quiet. "Of course, it makes sense. Why else would you be down here?" She drifted back towards the couch. "And that's why Bellator sent you here, of course." Her feverish energy had disappeared. Annie wasn't sure what to say. She hadn't expected her words to have such an effect on Saphira. After all, it wasn't as if she had ever known her parents. Not the way Annie had known them, anyway. Why was she so upset? "Sorry," she said, taking a seat opposite to her. "Maybe I shouldn't have dropped it on you like that." "No, that's all right. Really, I should be the one apologizing. I've been quite insensitive." Regaining her composure, she straightened out and asked, "Would you like a cup of tea? If Bellator sent you here, there's no doubt you have questions. 1,000,000 of them." She wasn't all that fond of tea, but she didn't move to stop Saphira as she rose to prepare a cup. Stepping past the living room to a small adjoining kitchen, Saphira tried to lift the mood. "I don't think you've ever been to the market before, have you? How much did Bellator tell you?" "Not much," she said, unable to disguise her irritation. "He told me about, goblins. And he told me that I was a changeling, and that my real name was Saphira Lazuli. And that's about it." Saphira came back into the room, holding in her hands a hot mug steaming with a bright pink drink. The scent alone was intoxicating, though Annie noticed Saphira's own cup held ordinary tea. "Truly," she exclaimed, "how terrible of him to do that. It's strange for Bellator to be so unkind. This must be a shock for you." "Yup," said Annie. "Shock is a good word for it. It's crazy. I'm still waiting to wake up." Saphira offered a sympathetic smile. "I can only imagine how surreal it is. I understand that life is very different above ground. In any case," she set her cup aside, apparently disinterested in it, "I'll do my best to answer your questions. Where do you want to start?" That was simple enough. "Why were we switched? What was the point?" Shutting her eyes in thought, Saphira waited a moment before speaking again. "The answer, I suppose it's a fairly long one. I'll have to start from the beginning, if you don't mind." "Go ahead," she said, getting comfortable as she took another sip of tea. "I'm all ears." She took a deep breath and began. "I'm assuming you're unfamiliar with goblin folklore and legend?" Annie shrugged. "I know next to nothing about everything." "Of course, from the very beginning then. Goblins, as we know them now, are essentially humans with a trace of goblin blood. Sometimes it's less, sometimes it's more. But it doesn't matter. A single drop will always distinguish a human from a goblin." Yeah, Bellator mentioned that. Except the last part. What difference does a drop of blood make?" "It can make a world of difference," she said. "To be a goblin is to have a certain magical ability, in addition to various immunities and preferences. And one drop is all it takes, figuratively speaking." Annie groaned. "There's that magic thing again. What is magic exactly? Is it something I should be worried about?" She seemed stumped. "I'm not sure how to answer that. Magic is really a generic term. We use it to explain a lot of things." Looking down at the drink in her cup, Annie raised an eyebrow. "Magic tea?" She laughed. "No, not really. But it's an example of the immunity I mentioned. Humans can't drink some of the teas we have in our shop. It makes people sick. Goblins, however, seem to crave the stuff." Crave. That was just about the right word. Annie found the tea savory and satisfying beyond anything she'd ever tasted. "Moving on," continued Saphira. "When goblins and humans, or goblins and goblins, have a child, the result is practically impossible to predict. A half-goblin and quarter-goblin, for example, could produce a child with any amount of goblin blood." She paused and gave the matter some thought. "Of course, the more goblin blood a couple have, the more likely they'll produce a heavy-blooded child. But there's a remarkable shortage of rules concerning goblin breeding in general." "All right," she said, rubbing her temples. "I think I follow. but I don't see where this is going. Here's where we get into goblin legend. I may have said that there aren't any rules when it comes to goblin blood, but there is one. Maybe two, depending on how you look at it. You see, whether two goblins, or a goblin and a human, decide to have a child, it is, almost always, guaranteed that their child will have at least a drop of goblin blood. Never, except for exceptionally rare cases, can a goblin have a truly human child. Wait, let me get this straight, said Annie. If a goblin has a kid, this kid can't ever be human, right? Even if the mother or father is human, there will always be a bit of goblin blood in them because of the other person. That's almost right. But, like I said before, it's not entirely impossible for a human child to be born of a couple possessing goblin blood. It's an extremely rare case. So rare, in fact, it only happens twice every 100 years. Oh, she nodded. That's the legend, right? Saphira nodded back. A boy and a girl. The case is a strange one. The child is born, perfectly human, but still has certain goblin attributes. Nothing strictly physical or emotional, if you understand what I mean. But it's said that these children possess a remarkably powerful strand of goblin magic, in addition to a few other, quirks. She paused for a moment. Such a child would be called a goblin prince or princess. Annie frowned. Okay, this is getting weird. Again. And I still don't see where you're going with this. Well, let me come from another direction, she suggested. I'm sorry about changing the subject so quickly, but I promise it'll all make sense in the end. Sure, she said, clearly doubtful. Go ahead. I'm sure you're familiar with terrorism above ground, said Saphira. You've heard of it before, haven't you? Now this was coming out of nowhere. Yeah, she answered. Who hasn't? Well, here below ground, in the market, we have our own kind of terrorists, the extremists we call transgressors. They aim to collapse the societal order of the goblin markets and bring their existence to the surface. Whoa, wait, markets? You mean there's more? All around the world, she said. This is but one of many. Rather busy for its size, but anyway. She waved a hand and continued. Transgressors believe that the goblin race should not be kept secret from those who live unaware outside the market. Their goal is total exposure, which would be disastrous to civilization as a whole, both above and below ground. Even though she didn't know much about the goblin market, Annie had to agree with her. It would be messy for sure. I guess transgressors are kind of a problem down here, eh? You could say that. Transgressor groups are very dangerous. Usually they're made up of heavy-blooded goblins, always wanting to stir up some trouble. She sighed. They really are extremists. So what does this have to do with what you were talking about before? Said Annie. About the goblin prince and princess stuff. Well, as you can imagine, transgressors are constantly looking for a way to one-up the authorities and gain an advantage. Naturally, they would be keen on finding the human children who house such power. They would seek to use them as a weapon. She waited a moment before reluctantly adding, It could make life very dangerous for those children. If the transgressors discovered their whereabouts, they wouldn't hesitate to take that power for themselves. She hesitated again. Or just kill the child, if they couldn't abduct them. Again, Annie's mind drifted back to the morgue, back to the 2 dead bodies. So, to keep the baby safe, the parents might just be crazy enough to send them away, she finished, in order to protect them. Wait a minute. If someone killed my parents, that means that they were after me, which actually means that they were after you, which means that you're... She stopped, her words trailing off into silence. Try as she might, she couldn't say it out loud. But Saphira saved her the trouble. I'm the Goblin Princess. The secret. The one that Bellator had mentioned. Saphira was the goblin princess. The look on her face, her eyes, even her tone of voice made it clear. The secret was a heavy one. But it didn't change how Annie felt about it. I was put in your place so that the terrorists would kill me instead? Bellator told me it was for the best, said Saphira, trying to defend herself. He said it would end up protecting both of us in the end, that the transgressors wouldn't even find out where you lived if your family stayed above ground, and he never thought he was putting you directly in danger. Annie was about to interrupt as she added, and he told me that if you ever were in danger that he would immediately bring you down to the market. Really? I guess he kept that promise at least. She looked back at Saphira, still fuming. But that doesn't justify kidnapping babies and switching their families around. No, she agreed. It doesn't. And I'm not saying it does. I didn't know anything about this until it was too late for me to... To what? To tell me what was really going on? To let me know that my parents weren't actually my parents? I'm sorry, Bellator told me. Forget Bellator, she snapped. I could be dead right now, all because some crazy terrorist group thinks I'm you, when I'm not. I'm really, really sorry. I know it was wrong, and I know that you're angry, but... Yeah, I'm angry. What did you expect? She turned away. What kind of parents would give up their child like that? They basically handed the death sentence to her. Was it really that important to protect some other family's princess daughter? What were they thinking? Stewing in a storm of her own raging thoughts, Annie had failed to take notice of Saphira herself. When she finally lifted her gaze, the fury vanished. She had forgotten that Saphira was a victim too. She had never met her real parents. She would never get the chance to now. And she really did seem sorry. Not only that, but if the whole Goblin Princess thing was true, she was the one who was really in danger. And it would stay that way her whole life. Now that Annie was safe in the market, she didn't have to worry about it anymore. And, strangely enough, she didn't feel at all upset about the death of her adopted parents. Saphira, on the other hand, was completely deflated. She sat on the couch, eyes downcast, a silent apology on her lips. Really, Annie should have been the one to apologize. Sorry, she said, after a long silence. I know it's not your fault or anything, I'm just really mad. I know. Saphira looked up again, hopeful. At least let me offer you your real parents' address. She got to her feet and cleared some space on a desk in the back of the room. They're just west of here, in Redstone Market. I'm sure you'll want to see them, now that you know the truth. Oh, no, don't bother. She was disinterested in meeting the parents that had given her up. I really don't need it. But you might want it in the future, she said, scribbling down the address on a small piece of paper. She handed it to Annie. You never know. Okay. She took the note, albeit grudgingly. Thanks. There was a knock at the door, followed by a whiny voice. Can I come in now? Yes, called Saphira. We're just about done. The door swung open and in walked Kit. Finally, he said. What took you so long? Though Saphira offered no answer, Annie scowled at him. You're so rude, you know that? It hasn't been that long. You kiddin'? I think I downed 5 cups of tea. I'm feeling a bit loopy. I don't know what Timothy puts in that stuff, but it tastes like crunchy mushrooms and firecrackers. Annie shook her head. You have the absolute most weirdest expressions, ever. Sexy, right? He said, resting his elbows on the back of her chair. You're unbelievable. She rose from her seat, disappointed that the interview was over, but eager to leave the place anyway. In any case, said Saphira, if you ever need anything at all, let me know. I'll do whatever I can to help you out. Have you got a place to stay, at least? The thought hit Annie like a rolling boulder. Where was she going to stay? She didn't have any family underground, not here in the market. There may have been an inn or two with a room available, but she didn't have any cash on hand. Besides, she was pretty sure that the currency in the goblin market would be different from what they used above ground. What was she supposed to do? "She's staying with me," said Kit. "What?" she exclaimed. "No, I'm not." Yeah, you are. I actually have a vacancy back at my place where you won't, take up too much space." He gestured around the room. "Unless you'd rather squeeze in here with little Miss Lazuli and sleep on the couch." Saphira seemed embarrassed, probably because Kit was right, and the only place available would have been the couch. Annie was stumped. Nothing made her more uneasy than the thought of bunking with Kit back on his own turf. At the same time, it was obvious that she would be imposing if she decided to stay at the tea shop. "Here's what we're going to do," she said, thrusting a finger in his face. "I'll go back with you, check out the place, and then I'll make a decision." He shrugged. "Fair enough." "You're always welcome to stay here," said Saphira, still wanting to be helpful. "Just in case it doesn't work out. And please swing by the shop as often as you can. I want to make sure you adjust to market life." "I will," promised Annie. I will stop by. I'm not guaranteeing anything about adjusting to this place." She laughed. "Oh, you'll have a great time, I know it." With that last remark, she turned to Kit. "I'm awfully sorry, it seems that you know my name, but I don't know yours." "Kit," he answered. "Just call me Kit." "Kit, then." She smiled politely. "You look familiar. Have I seen you around the market by any chance? I've only been here a few months, so I can't be sure." "Could have," he said. "I work at the Ace of Clubs. Have you ever been there?" "No." She shook her head. "I don't go to clubs. Maybe I've seen you around the shop?" "No," he answered. "I don't drink tea." Annie felt the conversation going downhill. "Right," she said, tugging on Kit's arm. "I guess we'll be on our way. Thank you for whatever this was." "You're welcome." She offered another smile. "Come back for some more tea, all right? You'll have to find a favorite." The idea of another cup was enticing. "Thanks, I will." She turned to leave, with Kit at her heels. "See you around." "Yes, see you," she said, watching as they entered the stairwell. "And nice to meet you too, Kit." With that, the two closed the door behind them, leaving Saphira on her own once again. Making her way back to the couch, she picked up her book and fingered the pages. Try as she might, she couldn't force herself back into it. Instead, she put the book down and started pacing back and forth across the small space. Eventually, she gave that up as well, and headed for the stairs to the loft, where her bedroom was waiting on the 3rd floor. She went over to the dresser in the corner and pulled out one of the drawers. Her belongings were scant. When she moved away from home, she hadn't brought much with her. Saphira was disinterested in bringing along the memories of a childhood that had been, for her, less than enjoyable. That was the problem with goblins. They didn't really have sympathy. They were all so stone cold. She tried to keep this in mind as she took out the faded photograph of her parents, her real parents. Sitting on her bed, she fingered the smiling faces. It wasn't Annie's fault. She hadn't meant to hurt her feelings. She was just emotionless. That's how goblins were. Blunt creatures, all of them. They couldn't help themselves. Besides, she had never met those people in the photograph. Sure, they were her parents, but she was raised by a different couple. Really, She had no connection to them. But all this did not comfort her. Her parents were dead. Holding the picture close to her heart, Saphira curled up on her bed and cried. Hey, hi, I'm your narrator, Miranda Eastwood, also the author of The Truth About Goblins. If you liked this chapter, remember to add, follow, or subscribe to this channel so you can hear the next one. And if you didn't like this chapter, oh well, I can't really do anything about that. In any case, I just thought I'd let you know about my Patreon. You can check it out if you'd like to throw some support my way. It would mean a lot to me. Not to mention there's loads of extra exclusive content that I only post on Patreon. While I'm at it, I'll mention that The Truth About Goblins is now available as a complete audiobook, and you can get it wherever you get your audiobooks. Thanks for listening.